All right, welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Darish. Joining us from Toronto is a contributor to Latest.com and a staff writer at IssueHawk. Bringing us that international flair, it's Eric Carrier. And he's Latest.com senior political analyst and a military vet. Joining us from Pittsburgh is Josh Patton. And he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People. Joining us from New York, it's Peter Van Buren. All right, well, last night we had a big election day in many parts of the country, and once again the Democrats suffered some big-time defeats, including the Kentucky gubernatorial seat, which they've held for the better part of the last half century. Democrats now hold just 17 governorships across the country, down from 29 in 2008. And since Obama was elected, Democrats have lost over 900 state legislature seats, 69 House seats, 13 Senate seats. Peter, how big of a crisis is the Democratic Party in right now, and what do we need to do to start winning back some of these seats?
Well, this is certainly not good for the Democrats. I mean, there's always the saying that these kind of state elections are on local issues, and presidential elections are on larger issues and national and international issues. And so some would say, fine, this is really not that big a deal as far as the national election is concerned. But I don't know that you can really divide people's minds that sharply. I mean, local issues become national issues when enough people are concerned about them. And this speaks to some of the strengths of the Republicans. The other problem for the Democrats is when you take away all of these local and gubernatorial seats, you're really cutting into the farm team. A lot of governors go on to become presidential candidates and even presidents. Bill Clinton was a governor. Many of the Bushes have been state governors and things like that. And so without a farm team, without that local support, and in fact, without the local people, Democrats in office to kind of see things through for you, you do chip away at support for the presidency. And it does raise questions coming up next year if the Republican presidential group can actually field a decent candidate. That's kind of a prerequisite for this.
Well, Josh, I mean, Matt Bevin is a far-right conservative Tea Party type of guy. What does it say when a guy like that can get elected in a state where the Democrats have control for most of our lifetimes?
You know, the Matt Bevin story is very interesting, but I have to challenge the narrative that the Democrats lost big yesterday. I did a story on the site about how these off-cycle elections are actually very good for Democrats. On the local level, school districts, things like that, teachers' unions come out in full force, whereas most of the electorate stays home. Also, across the country, here in Pennsylvania, all three state Supreme Court seats went to the Democrats. It went to the Democrats in a lot of their elections. New Jersey got the largest assembly majority for the Democrats in almost 40 years. And I think Democrats also won big in Indianapolis, too. So actually, I think that what this shows is that the pushback against Obama, which has been pretty devastating for Democrats, they found a villain in him that they hadn't had before, since Bill Clinton, really. And so I think that has been like a nice short-term strategy for them. But I think the long-term strategy, and I think we're going to start seeing this next election, especially if the Republicans field someone like Trump or Carson, is that they are going to start losing in these smaller House elections, even some of the governorships, just because the mainstream of the Republican Party is going so far into the fringe of the right wing that, you're losing educated moderates in middle class to affluent areas where actually in 2016 a lot of the House seats are going to be open.
You're right about the off-season elections, but when you look at the numbers, 900 state legislature seats is nothing to scoff at. And when you look at it, the numbers correspond with the same time frame that the Tea Party rose. So is that really a bad thing for the Republicans? Again, the new Kentucky governor is a Tea Party guy.
Well, maybe. The Tea Party also lost pretty big in the 2014 midterms. Republicans won, no doubt. But with the exception of unseating Eric Cantor, the newness and the excitement behind the Tea Party has started to wane, especially as you get people saying more and more crazy things. So the thing is it's actually no side is won or lost yet. But unless the Republicans are able to rein in, the wall building rhetoric and, just any number of the nutty things they've said, I don't think that they are going to be poised to do well in 2016 or going forward, especially as the electorate ages. Remember, teenagers today, they don't care about gay issues, other culture issues, the way that this generation does or the generation before.
Eric,
so again, they may do well now, but in 10 years.
Eric, we're talking about huge losses in the state and local elections. Do you think that the Republicans who now run more than 30, who now have more than 30 gubernatorial seats can pull off an upset come 2016 nationally?
I think that they can, because one thing about Republican voters is that they always vote no matter what. They turn out and they vote. Democrats tend to suffer from voter apathy, where if a candidate doesn't interest them, then they say, my vote doesn't matter. They don't show up. And that is a massive problem. Even though a large portion of the population maybe does vote Democrats, your vote doesn't mean anything if you actually don't take the opportunity to use it.
Well, Hillary's leading in the polls over pretty much every Republican right now, but Democrat Jack Conway led the Kentucky race the entire way in the polls and came up short. When you look at these losses and you look at the poll numbers, aren't these numbers hugely concerning for Hillary Clinton and the Democrats heading into 2016, Peter?
I think one of the things that would be of concern to Hillary, picking up on Eric's point, is in fact voter apathy. We've seen that Hillary's negatives run very close to her positives. In other words, if you ask someone, do you support her, the number of people who say they do and the number of people who say, for example, they don't trust her, they're not that different. And so if people don't show up on Election Day to vote for Hillary, I think that's going to be as big a problem for her as whatever the Republicans are doing. This is going to be probably a closer race at the end of the day than we think, largely because of the question of turnout. A lot of these local elections, and even up to state legislatures like we've had in Virginia, was a race that everyone was watching. They're decided by, on the scale of things, relatively few votes. Josh pointed out that unions will turn out their people. In certain areas, for example, where they've got a lot of senior citizens, there'll be buses and things. In the African-American community, they'll be organizing on a church level. And they can turn those people out fairly reliably. When you scale that up nationally, it gets a lot harder to do in significant numbers. Young people, as Josh pointed out, not only are not worried about politicians that are going to put gays back in the closet or anything like that, they don't turn out to vote very much, and that also skews the Republican Party. I suspect Hillary's concerns are going to be largely getting her own people to come out and vote, and then pulling as many women out of the Republican pool as she possibly can. The hardcore Republican voters, they're not going to vote for her no matter what.
Well, in 2008, before all these losses, we saw Obama help his party win a big-time Senate seats, House seats, state legislature seats. Josh, do you think Hillary, being a woman, can help carry her party to maybe win back some of these seats in 2016?
I think that's two different questions, really, because in 2008, you're right, Obama did, the Obama coalition of voters and organizers and whatever did bring in some big wins for Democrats. But remember, this was also after, people were tired of Bush. There was, it was just the Democratic brand was much better than it is now. But one thing that is interesting about Hillary being the, first woman president is that she's able to sort of campaign on that in a way that President Obama wasn't. He was very notoriously distant when it came to race. He was, very rarely did he talk about I want to be the first black president, because, there's arguments saying that would have been bad. However, with the woman thing, I think that people are more receptive to that, especially post-Obama. Now, the one thing that's interesting is that Hillary Clinton is a notorious Republican villain, you know what I mean? And so if she's on the ticket, it may end up helping Republicans in swing districts just, where she may take a state, but a district that was in play, the turnout might be higher because Republicans voting against Hillary. But, that's flip a coin. That might be true or not. That it's too far out to tell that.
Eric, do you think?
Although the thing to keep in mind is that while Hillary is in fact a very polarizing candidate, as Josh pointed out, Bill, perhaps somewhat inexplicably, is still amazingly popular. And so when you vote for Hillary, you get Bill at the same time. And so in places where Hillary would scare people out of the room, Bill can probably pull some more of them in. And that remains a real strength for Bill, and he's probably a huge asset to the Democrats going forward towards 2016.
Eric, do you think Hillary Clinton being on the ballot is going to help Democrats in state and local elections, or will actually hurt them because of how much people hate Hillary?
I think it actually will serve to hurt her. When we look at voters that are on the fence, if Donald Trump can come out with a plan that's somewhat moderate, I mean, he's always going to have the racist rhetoric at the wall and such, but if he can come out with something moderate that liberals can grasp onto, you might find that people that are on the fence forced to choose between Hillary and Trump may choose a Trump because of how much they distrust Hillary. There's numerous sources you can look at of Hillary being caught lying on the spot. I saw a video just the other day where she was discussing a trip to Bosnia with Clinton, her husband, in the 90s, saying that she was under sniper fire and under attack. But when you watch the video, she gets out of the helicopter and she's waving to people and shaking hands and kissing babies. And she was confronted on this, and she tried to play it off as something like, oh, I was just deprived of sleep. So, the problem with Clinton is that she does lie, and it's known, and that might dissuade voters from choosing her in an election.
Well, she's doing well right now. A new set of NBC Wall Street Journal polls show Hillary beating every potential Republican challenger outside of Ben Carson, whom she's currently tied with. But one thing I don't see anyone talking about is the fact in the same set of polls, Bernie Sanders actually has larger leads than her. He leads Trump by 9, leads Rubio by 5. Josh, a lot of Democrats talk about their concerns about Sanders isn't electable because he's a socialist, but don't these numbers suggest he's more electable than Hillary because he doesn't have the same baggage as she does?
Well, I think that the when it comes to opinion polls, you're going to end up with, it's not really who's going to vote for whom. It's sort of just taking the temperature of the electorate. I think the concern that a lot of Democrats have that aren't excited about Bernie Sanders is that, it's fun now and he's talking about all these big ideas. But once you got into the nitty gritty of a general election and you have to start putting forward concrete plans, that he's not going to hold up as well as someone like Hillary, who's a very calculated, centrist, politically savvy creature. Whereas Bernie Sanders he's like Ron Paul for the Democrats. He's just ideologically consistent, talks about the same things. And if you say, but that doesn't make any sense, Senator Sanders, he says, yes, it does. So I think they're two different candidates. And I think what'll be interesting if Sanders perhaps challenges Hillary Clinton more in the next debate. Because, again, if you remember back to 2008, Obama was pretty tepid in the first debate stage, but then those successive debates, it got downright nasty. So, that email moment may be the peak of their friendship on the debate stage.
Peter, come general election, what is a bigger problem for either candidate? Is it all the decades of Hillary baggage, or is it the fact that Bernie Sanders is a far-left socialist?
Well, we need to remember that before Bernie can challenge Trump or Carson and make use of those numbers, he's still got to get past Hillary. There's a Democratic primary, and Hillary is ahead of him 2-1, I think. So Sanders will never really get a chance, I think, to run against Trump or Carson or any of these other guys. Each candidate is going to go into this general election with a lot of weight behind them. I think the thing that surprises me the most is how little people seem to care. The Republicans screwed up the Benghazi hearing just about as effectively as it was possible to do. They failed to create a narrative that was brief and short and clear about Hillary. that she slept through Benghazi and failed to lead when she had the chance, that the emails are not about legal or illegal. They're about judgment. They're about transparency. They picked apart crazy things like Sidney Blumenthal, but they let her make up other bits and pieces along the way. As you said, the lying that she seems to do. One of the things, for example, was that she claimed that 90% of her emails were recorded in the State Department systems because she sent them to others. The next day, we find out that basically she made that number up. The State Department, who generally has been very sympathetic to her, wouldn't touch that. They kept referring everybody back to the campaign. Trump, meanwhile, sort of says whatever. I mean, he's kind of like almost like he has Tourette's syndrome some days out there. He just says whatever comes into his mind, and everybody says, "Oh, there's Trump." So it's proving to be a very odd general election that's coming up, where what used to matter a lot to voters, either integrity or poise, I guess, doesn't seem to really be part of it. It's almost more of a reality show where, they'll have Trump making a speech and they'll cut away to Carson saying, "I can't believe what he said." I worry a lot about this election that's going to be coming up, that it will be so unfocused and so, I guess, silly that any real issues will just be swept under the rug.
Well, you mentioned a good point. Hillary has all these things working against her, and Bernie Sanders had been creeping up on her in New Hampshire. He had actually led her in New Hampshire, creeping up on her in Iowa and nationally, and all of a sudden Hillary's just pulling away and Sanders is plummeting. Eric, the Democrats seem very excited about Sanders, but are they already giving up, or are they giving in too soon?
The problem with the Sanders campaign, I've touched on this in some political polls I work with, is that he's a slow rising candidate. His whole platform is about building momentum and slowly growing and infecting new voters into his platform. Whereas Hillary Clinton's much more the Democratic establishment. She works with the established tropes. She doesn't really reach out unless she needs to. I mean, one of the first major stances we saw her take was on gun control, and that was only because of a couple shootings that occurred. So where Sanders is willing to take stances early, and he has in many cases, Clinton is not willing to. And so in order for Sanders to grow in the polls, he's going to have to steal some of those votes, and it's difficult because he's working with an established name. I don't think that the Democrats have necessarily given up on him, but unless he can quickly grab more votes and more support, he's just going to have to earn the face time himself.
Well, it did seem like he was
to be fair,
slowly, but in the last few weeks, Hillary's just pulling away, and Sanders is right back to where he was, down 40, 50 points in some of these polls. What's going on, Josh?
I think that I do think it has a lot to do with sort of the debate performance. I think people saw that just that Hillary was capable next to Sanders, and that, she didn't come off poorly in the debate. And, Sanders is 73. He's untested on like a national level. So I think that there is some rightful hesitancy there on behalf of, a lot of Democrats. The other thing I think that Hillary has sort of going for her is that, she was able to, like Eric said, come out very forcefully on gun control, which is an issue very important to the liberal base. And she's also sort of to the left on Sanders on that one, just because of, the policies he had to be competitive in a place like Vermont. The Sanders campaign would say that, national policy versus what's good for Vermont are two different things. And in a way that there's an argument that says that's correct. But I definitely think that, Hillary is starting to campaign much more smartly, and, pick and choose her moments, and that's working. And, what Sanders has to do is just find some way to reinvigorate the campaign and capture not just the voters' attention, but the media's attention again, too.
Well, on the other side, I mean, all the attention has been on the Republicans in the last CNBC debate. In fact, the RNC has scrapped an NBC debate scheduled for next year after last week's debate. Josh, pretty much every candidate seemed to complain about the moderator's, quote, bias, but was the CNBC debate really more skewed than any of the other debates?
I don't think so in the least. In fact, now I will say this. The one thing that's hard to defend about the CNBC debate is how much of a shit show it was in terms of production. It was poorly produced. The moderators didn't have control. I mean, people just talking over each other, and the moderators looked helpless. The other thing, too, is there were some moments where candidates, they didn't have the correct sourcing for their questions. So I think that was an experience. I don't know if any of them had moderated a debate before. But in terms of bias, NBC is the Wall Street Network. That's not, it's not MSNBC. It's a network that should have perhaps maybe been more policy focused on the economy, but in no way was it any different than the Fox debate or the CNN debate. But to be fair, the GOP candidates complained about that too.
Peter is asking candidates pointed questions about their past quotes, screw-ups, and policies biased.
No, of course not. And the tougher the questions, the better the debate. I mean, it makes better television if you're just looking at it from a cold-hearted network perspective. And the point of these things is to let us get to know a little bit about the candidates in a less structured environment than the candidate, him or herself, simply talking to us the way that they do when they go out on the campaign trail, where it's basically a one-way dialogue. CNBC really kind of blew it in so many ways, and Josh touched on them. I mean, one of the things that needs to happen is the Republican pool needs to thin down. It's very difficult to play traffic cop when you've got, 8 or 10 different people up there. Jim Webb has taught every candidate in every debate to whine about how much speaking time he or she gets, and that you could kind of chop out a certain number of minutes from the whole debate where it was just candidates saying, it's my turn to talk, it's my turn to talk. That needs to be really wrestled in either by a moderator that's a lot stronger, or simply by kind of thinning the field out and saying, look, it's now time for us to parse these people. I think the other thing would be that CNBC tried too hard for, I hate to say the word gotcha moments because I don't like that term, but if you're going to accuse somebody of something, a political candidate on national television of something, you got to have your A game. You've got to have your pieces together. You've got to have your details together, and you've got to be able to answer them back. When you accuse Ben Carson of shilling for some fake drug company, and Ben says, no, that's not true, you've got to be ready to answer that. You've got to be able to support your question and not just let him get away with that. I think there was one with Rubio as well. So hopefully
Trump,
whoever... Yeah.
I was just going to say there was that moment where Becky Quick said to Trump, you called Marco Rubio Mark Zuckerberg's personal secretary from, and Trump said, no, I didn't, but it was his actual website. Like it came from the website.
Oh,
well, that alone
is... go in and find the exact quote. They did do that later on in the show.
Right. You've got to have that. I mean, that's sort of debating 101. You don't challenge the other side unless you've got those facts at hand. It was on your website on this date. Even have a graphic or something available if necessary. So it was kind of an amateur effort, and the candidates, they smell blood in the water quicker than any of us, and they went after the host. We'll see what happens next. I mean, I thought actually the Fox debate, which most people in advance anticipated to be extremely soft and partisan, I think they actually asked some decent questions in that debate. So it's going to be interesting where the next debate is held and what the moderators do. Being America and being TV, it's very possible that, Sarah Palin will host the next debate, and in the middle of the show, Huckabee is going to walk off stage and sit with the moderators and ask them other questions, and the whole thing will evolve into some sad political theater, even sadder than it is now. And that would be a shame.
I hope they bring in hologram Reagan.
Baby Hitler and hologram Reagan.
Discussing
Pizza Rat comes on with what do you think about the Pizza Rat minority? Are their rights going to be supported if you're president? So, all right, I'll shut up.
I'll make a quick point about this, though. While you two were saying that you didn't think the debate was that biased, I wouldn't say it was overly biased, but there were some moments where they asked terrible questions that had nothing to do with politics, and maybe they're doing it for views. But, like, for example, what comic book character are you? I think was to Trump. And then to Kasich, what two people here do you hate or something? And they were just questions that had no substance to them. And I'm not a Ted Cruz supporter by any means. I dislike him a lot. But he made a good point when he came out and said, like, look at these kind of questions you're asking us. How can you expect us to take this debate seriously when we're being asked these types of questions? And that was the one time where I actually found myself agreeing with something that Ted Cruz said. And that's a rare moment, I think, for anyone.
It's a scary moment there. But keep in mind, in the Democratic debate, they asked, which enemy, who's someone who's an enemy of yours that you're most proud of, which in fact brought out the bizarro side of Jim Webb. We talked about, murdering the Vietnamese guy or something like that. And I think it was the first Republican debate where they went round robin about what your Secret Service code name might be if you're president. So,
oh, God. Remember Chris Christie said a Care Bear name? He said Trueheart. It was my favorite thing. It's like it's a Care Bear with like a big rainbow heart. It's the gayest Care Bear of them all, and I love that he said that. He had no idea.
He corrected that after the show, and he changed it to not worst. So they wanted to go back and review. But, there's these kind of...
If we wanted to embarrass the candidates more, asking them tough policy questions would actually accomplish that rather than the silly questions that they asked. Because
to be fair,
they're going to get destroyed by them.
Oh, shit, we're NBCing right now.
Go ahead,
I was just going to say, to be fair, Eric, I think that the comic book villain question was poorly phrased, but that was a good question because he was saying...
I haven't had enough time to talk. I haven't had enough time to talk. Josh has mentioned my name 17 and a half times.
What's the rules on how we jump in? My point is that they were asking Trump how he was going to do the ridiculous things he was going to do. The same thing with John Kasich. He just came out the day before and said he had it with the front runners. So that was a relevant question, too. I mean, again, maybe not the deepest, most substantive ones, but I remember there was, when Marco Rubio attacked the media, it was on a policy question. And it escapes me at the moment what exactly the question was. But, they were saying, ask us policy questions. Would ask, say, a policy question, and Rubio. So, I mean, that's Republican 101, attacking the media.
Football question.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't ask some good ones, but when you're asking, and the Chris Christie response to that cracks me up even now. I can still watch it. But, I mean, it's not a necessary question. Sure, it's an industry that maybe needs a bit of regulation, but to focus on it in a national debate is a little sad, and it shows kind of how dumbed down some of the questions were.
Right. That is a fair point.
I was waiting for one of the candidates to really just turn that around and say, why are you even asking me about comic book characters? Let's talk about something important like my plan for Medicare or something.
They're afraid to actually have to answer those questions, though.
Well, the good point there. But, throw it right back at them and say, it's a silly, irrelevant question. Let's have a little more respect for the voters. I think
that's what Ted Cruz accomplished a little bit with his comment.
Yeah.
Josh, since last week's debate, the campaigns have really been squabbling with the RNC. What does that rift say about the candidates' relationship with their own party?
I think that it has to do with the anti-establishment sort of bias that's going on with the voters. I think that it looks good. They're attacking Washington. Now they're attacking the RNC. They're not owned by anybody. They're crusading for the people. And Reince Priebus, his job, or at least the way he's run his job, has been to be whatever the candidates need. If he's an attack dog, he'll attack. If he's got to be the punching bag, he'll be the punching bag. It's kind of why he's, after Michael Steele, he stayed at the RNC. He's holding the job like a Pope or a Roosevelt, at least. So I don't think that the RNC and the campaigns have any tension beyond the fact that, Trump I don't think they were really keen on Trump being the front runner, and I think they'll be happy when he's not, if he's not. But I definitely think that the debate stuff in general, it's going to backfire big time, because while media bias is great for other conservative media or, even some conservative candidates, when you're trying to like weasel your way out of a debate or whatever, people, that stinks to people. That looks like you have something to hide rather than you're demanding respect.
Well, I mean, what is it that they want? I mean, we're talking about, making sure that the moderators are like registered Republicans, but I mean, I'm sure that the Fox News panel was pretty heavily Republican. I mean, even if Fox News is too biased for them, what exactly do they want, Peter?
I think they want softballs that will just simply give them an opportunity to go to their talking points. And not have to worry about being asked a question that's going to make them uncomfortable, put them on the spot, or give their opponent some kind of advantage. It's very unrealistic, and I think they don't really understand, as you pointed out, how silly and weak it makes them look. People like to see these candidates look strong. Not necessarily call each other funny names or, to each other like, kind of the Bush and Rubio thing last time. But, stand up, look strong, make a good point, answer a tough question, or at least appear to answer a tough question. And I think they're going to spoil it for themselves and chase away the audience. I mean, keep in mind what a wonderful opportunity this is for people like Kasich or Ted Cruz, who don't get as much mainstream media as the others. This is their chance to really put themselves out there in front of the electorate. And if they help the big candidates, Carson and Trump, below this, then, they're really shooting themselves in the foot. It would be a shame.
Remember at the end of 2012, when we went through that, like, revolving door of front runners, and I think that was even after the first primary, but maybe it was before. The timing, I don't remember. But either way, every single change that happened came the day after a debate. Rick Perry had his oops moment. He was gone. Then Gingrich was in. Then the next debate, Gingrich fucked up. And, Mitt Romney finally ascended. So, and the other thing that's interesting, too, is the next debate is on the Fox Business Network. It would be really interesting because Fox Business is like way more in the tank conservative-wise than even Fox News in general. So it would be amazing if they came hard as hell at the next debate. Like if they come in and start kissing their asses, which I think they might do just because the candidates will start coming on Fox Business more. But if they really want to maybe make a name for themselves and show up CNBC, they should come hard at the candidates and make them sweat on that stage.
Well, Eric, who do you think looked best and who looked worse on that debacle of a stage that we saw on CNBC?
It's a tough question because they're all kind of goofy in their own way. I think one moment for Marco Rubio where he performed well was when he deflected Jeb Bush when he came after him for missing the Senate votes. I thought Rubio performed very well there. I thought that he would melt down and it would probably be the end of Rubio, but it wasn't. He pushed it away. He turned it on Bush, made Bush look foolish, and then moved on from there. Donald Trump was Donald Trump. I mean, it's what we expected from him in that debate. I don't think there was anything.
I thought he was actually more toned down than usual in this past debate.
Well, I feel like, but now that he's basically secured a block of voters, his campaign managers are obviously feeding him into like, okay, you need to tone down this rhetoric a little bit, turn this up. They're basically fine-tuning him to be a more palatable candidate. Whether they can do that before the election, will remain to be seen. But I think, that we will see him emerge from the crowd.
Peter, who do you think came away looking best? Who came away looking the worst?
Certainly, maybe not looking the worst, but certainly coming out of the debate the worst was Jeb Bush. This is a guy who started months ago with all the advantages, the name, the money, track record. He could pick and choose between his father and his brother's presidencies to focus on certain issues, and he just flubbed that up incredibly. These debates have been a chance for him to to push back against the image that he's a loser, and he has not done that at all. If anything, he's encouraged people to see him as a loser. In terms of winners, as Eric pointed out, there were a lot of losers, but I guess Rubio would be near the top of people who kind of helped themselves in this debate. You know, Rubio is laying out a position for himself where once Bush is gone and some of these smaller candidates disappear, Rubio is saying, I'm just going to wait here. I'm going to wait for Trump, you guys to get tired of Trump. I'm going to wait for everyone to figure out that Ben Carson really doesn't have anything to say. And when you're ready for a mainstream Republican candidate that was good on TV, that speaks well, and that maybe has a chance of standing next to Hillary as an equal, you know, I'll just be over here waiting and try not to make too many mistakes in the interim. So, Rubio up, Bush down. Everybody else kind of hovered about where I expected them to be.
Josh, do you agree?
I do agree with what Peter said, but in the interest of being different, I'm going to pick two different names. In terms of who came out of it looking the worst, well, if you can call it looking, because he was basically invisible, was Rand Paul. I mean, I had to check twice during the middle of the debate if he dropped out in a commercial break, because, you know, I can't remember even one moment of him speaking other than saying, what's the rule on how we respond here? So he needs, and he was one of the earliest people to, you know, basically declare his candidacy. And then once he officially declared, it was like a nosedive right into the AstroTurf. He's not done anything, and I think is he's had the worst time of it so far, but he definitely really lost in that debate because people didn't even know he was there. And in terms of coming out looking good, again, Rubio, I think he clearly won, and I think he's definitely going to do what Peter said, which I like to describe as the rope-a-dope, but you just hang back until everyone crashes and burns, and then you're just there as the adult in the room. But I also think Chris Christie, he kept himself alive with both the media answer that we talked about earlier and in the aftermath of the debate. He was one of the first ones to tell everyone else to quit their bitching and just debate. And I think that is sort of, because since Trump stole his whole shtick, that whole, like, I'm a blunt, you know, not politically correct guy, hard time carving out a place for himself, no pun intended, then, you know, and I think that kept him alive. So I think he had some good moments in that debate, and in the aftermath, if he's going to stick around, it's because of that.
All right, well, let's
honestly, I forgot about Rand Paul. It was what you said is not really a joke. I mean, this is a guy who, again, like Jeb Bush, months ago, a year ago, was talked about as kind of a big deal. You know, his filibuster against the NSA, some of his more progressive stands, the idea that he represented, you know, a new kind of Republican-type candidate. This was what people were talking about, and boy,
and he had the built-in coalition from his father. Like, his father's supporters were just waiting for Ron Paul too, and they got in front of an aircraft carrier.
And he looks almost pained to be up there, somewhere between bored and constipated. It's almost, you feel bad for him. I really just want to say, look, you can sit down if you want. You know, if this isn't working out, just have a seat. It'll be okay.
Oh, Eric, I mean, at what point do some of these guys start dropping out? Because, I mean, if you're Rand Paul and your poll numbers haven't budged above 1% for like months, at what point do you call it quits?
I guess they're waiting to see if either Carson or Trump implodes, or they're staying out of pride because Trump keeps challenging them, telling them to quit, and so maybe they don't want to quit to bow down to that.
All right, well, let's shift gears. Every week we talk about police brutality, and every week we mention that police body cameras are a potential solution. But Josh, you wrote this week that body cameras can actually be used as crime-fighting tools that might infringe on people's rights. How would these body cameras work against the citizenry?
Well, the thing is that a lot of body cam manufacturers are trying to, you know, especially since they're being required in a lot of places, they're now fighting for the contract. And one of the ways that they're trying to appeal to police officers is by, putting tech in the body cameras that can help make their job easier. For example, police can, using, in 12 states, there's no facial recognition use by law enforcement. Every other law enforcement division, every other state, they're using facial recognition, pulling your faces off of traffic cameras and identifying you from, all that footage. Now they could link that up to the body camera. So a police officer can be just walking down the street, catch your face. If you're wanted, they, in theory, could, turn right around and apprehend you. Or, worst case scenario is that it gives a false positive and they jump and attack some innocent person who they thought was someone that was wanted. But it does show that, these body cameras are not, just like any technology, they can be applied in ways that sort of encroach on private citizens' rights and make the policing, giving the police more power and more tools at which to, investigate people without their knowledge.
Eric, are you willing to take that trade-off in order to, maybe hold police?
Actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
And also, Eric, they're using them in Canada already. There was, you know about that?
Yeah, no, I've been reading about it. For me, I actually support the body cams. I think that they should be implemented across police forces in both the United States, Canada, and that's worldwide, any Western country. I think that they add a level of accountability which is needed. Any situation where you're dealing with firearms or potential high danger situations, I think that adding a camera to add a second layer of credibility to the argument is necessary. Whether it protects the police officer from a drunk girl who said that he raped her, or it protects a citizen from a cop that's going rogue and shooting people and trying to play it off as an accident. I mean, we've seen it happen. Let's say, what was the one shooting that took place where a guy was recording from a fence and on the graph the police officer shot the guy like 5 times?
Walter Scott.
Okay, that's the one. So if
In
there
South
was a
Carolina.
video recording of that would have just been another case of a black man trying to rob a cop that got killed. Because there was some footage, it saved the day. And in the case where there was body cams, then it would have obviously shown the truth in that sense too. However, then some people may say, well, what if the officer doesn't turn it on? You need to enact punishment. If an officer doesn't have his cam on during a dicey situation, he needs to be punished as if he was hiding something, or they need to develop a system where they come on automatically. If citizens are going to start complaining about how it infringes on their rights, I don't think they're looking at the bigger picture. I think when they implemented it in somewhere in California, I want to say San Francisco, or was it in LA, they noticed an over 70 or 80% reduction in violent crime and police brutality instances. So I think that it's a trade-off that's worth doing. The costs are minimal, and what it provides for society as a whole is a much needed level of accountability.
Peter, is it a trade-off worth doing?
Well, two things. First of all, one thing that technology should be already doing with body cams is they should be linked. They should be running constantly. This is what happens like in surveillance cameras in the grocery store. They run constantly, and you've always got 24 hours, for example, of footage on that camera. And then at some point it starts re-erasing and re-recording over that. So the cop should never be in a position where he or she can turn the body cam on and off. If they didn't want to do something like that, then it would be relatively easy to have the camera triggered by, say, a firearm, the police officer removing a weapon from the holster, the taser, anything like that. I mean, the idea that cops can decide when evidence can be gathered and when it shouldn't is ridiculous. It puts a hole in the whole theory. Facial recognition is one of the scary surveillance technologies that is now, the dog is already left on this one. City of London has over 1 million security cameras right now. New York City is probably very, very close to that. And all of them can and probably are connected to facial recognition technology. I did a story for Latest.com a week or two ago about how in Britain they scan the faces of an entire concert audience and look through there. At Super Bowl in the United States, everybody gets facially scanned without their knowledge, ostensibly looking for terrorists, but what in fact they start pulling out are all sorts of other people who they're interested in or wanted for. You connect facial technology with other forms of surveillance, and basically you start to know an awful lot about someone. And once that information exists, it doesn't go away. Once that information exists, its use is subject only to the people who can access it, and we already know a lot about how lame the security is on these things. You know, the body cams are an incremental step in the wrong direction in terms of surveillance, but I suspect on the scale of things, a relatively minor one, especially since there is
one thing worth mentioning. I was just going to say, one thing worth mentioning is that, the body cams and using it as facial recognition or, recording people without their knowledge, they're not mutually exclusive ideas. A number of activist groups, from the ACLU to a lot of libertarian privacy advocates to the NAACP, have just proposed have body cams, don't use facial recognition on them. Mm-hmm. And that's the type of common sense sort of measure that gives you the best of both worlds, ultimate protection on the citizen, but also in today's world fails to actually, gain any traction when it comes time to have decisions made.
The problem with any technology is that once you implement it, there's always going to be innovations in it, whether good or bad for the citizens. It's going to happen. It's something we can't stop.
There's a matter of trust, too, about, for example, like turning off the facial. We have learned recently regarding the Stingray. This is a technology used by law enforcement to capture cell phone signals. And officially, Stingrays can be used in most cases without warrants as long as they're simply collecting location data or metadata or something other than the content of the phone calls. Well, it turns out that the technology really has a on-off switch built into it. I'm being a little bit simplistic, but essentially it does. That would allow it to access the content of calls, what you're actually saying, and we're basically trusting law enforcement to not use that when they're employing the Stingray semi-legally. So these things get very, very spooky, and once, as Eric pointed out, the technology exists, where it goes and how it's used are nearly impossible to control.
1984.
It's 1984 was not supposed to be an instruction manual, but that's how it turned out.
On the Sean Hannity show last night, Geraldo Rivera said that police brutality against black citizens, quote, pales in comparison to the, quote, ghetto civil war that's going on in black neighborhoods. Peter, is there a ghetto civil war going on in black areas? And why aren't we talking about black-on-black violence as much as we're talking about police-on-black violence?
Well, I mean, first of all, to say, this violence is worse than that violence, I mean, it's kind of silly and academic.
I believe he was saying it's more prevalent.
Yeah. I'm sorry that I don't think it's a good idea for anybody to be gunned down in our cities. The difference really is that the police are a unique class of people in our society. They are empowered by us to carry a gun and to use it legally, in some cases, to harm or to kill people. That gives them an enormous power that the rest of us don't have. People can commit crimes. Somebody can shoot their neighbor in an act of passion or to rob them or whatever. But there's very little right in there, except in Florida where you could, if you're a white person, you can shoot black people. That's a separate issue. But the idea would be that the cops fall under a very unique category. And we, the people, empower them to have these tools, like weapons, to protect us. They're supposed to be working for us. And when it appears that they're not, then that's sort of the crime of murder and the crime of dissolving further our civil society. And that's why I think the cop killings matter a lot more than what Geraldo insists on calling the Civil War. I don't think that's even useful term.
Josh, black on black violence is certainly more prevalent than police on black violence. Should we be talking about it just as much? More?
Yeah, I don't know about maybe just as much, maybe. But the thing is when it comes to violence within, majority minority communities or, lower income level communities, that gets to any number of causal factors, from education to, availability of firearms to whether there's police presence or not. We talk about, I remember this distinctly, at least in my city, and I know there are probably places like this in cities all over America, where there were certain neighborhoods where the police just didn't go. You needed an ambulance, get to the town line because they're not coming into that neighborhood. So, when those are systemic failures as well. Peter's right. The police brutality, that's a systemic failure. The police are entrusted with power from the people to protect and serve and not to, to uphold the law and do whatever they can to make sure crime doesn't happen and that injuries don't happen and property damage, all that. But, when it comes to the quote-unquote ghetto civil war, which is just a shitty term and probably something he said on purpose because then people would be mentioning his name the next day, that's also a systemic failure, but of a different sort. Now, of course, people are responsible for their own actions, but, having been to actual war zones, it's, there is a kind of survive mentality in that. And so you will do things that you maybe don't think are correct or necessarily legal, but that's sort of even a better comparison, it's like the Wild West. No one thinks that the gunslinger in the saloon shooting the bandit is criminal. In a way, the Civil War aspect is a community's attempt to get justice, and by community I mean gang members. They may be there trying to secure turf for drug trade or whatever, but it is in the vacuum of a system. This stuff will happen. So
Eric,
that's just sort of how I see it. I think.
Eric, is the core problem the number of incidents of police brutality, or is it the fact that police aren't punished for the crimes that they commit? Black people are. We know that because of the hugely disproportionate amount of black people in our prisons.
Without diving into an extremely deep issue, which we could spend an entire episode on, I think it is because the police aren't punished and because they are authority figures. There's no doubt that racial profiling does exist. We see it a lot in the media, of course, but it does exist. It's tough. Like I said, we could go into a whole episode on this, just about situations, where, let's say when I'm driving, I know that if me or a black person is doing the same crime, more than likely the cop is going to pick him before he picks me. And, maybe this is stereotyping, but it does happen. And I've seen it in some situations myself. So yeah, my answer would be that it's because they're authority figures and they're expected to be unbiased, but they are.
Speaking of race, Rachel Dolezal, the former Spokane NAACP leader, earlier this week admitted that she was born white but identifies as black. Peter, we live in a culture where we're supposed to accept a person for whatever gender they are. Why doesn't the same thing apply to race? But on that same topic, given what we're talking about, why would anyone choose to be black?
Well, why she chooses to see herself as black, you'll have to ask her that question. Everyone has their own sort of self-image. I guess I see the point here. The idea would be that if I say, I believe I'm a woman, I identify as a woman, there's generally a trend in our society to accept me that way. And people don't seem to be overly concerned if I start to do what I can to make myself look more like a woman, right up to the point of surgery. So I get the idea that she may in her heart truly identify as a black person, and she certainly goes through a physical transformation to look like a black person. I don't have a good answer. The only thing I can kind of lean on a little bit is how our society is so racially charged. And these issues, I mean, if you're a man or you're a woman, there's a whole set of assumptions that go with that, but they tend not to be as difficult to sort through as when you say, well, I'm black or I'm white. The way our country is working these days, those are very polarizing statements, and they pull in stuff like, well, how do the police treat you, where you're going to get hired for a job. So I'm kind of conflicted on this one. I try to just satisfy myself by saying she's probably just a nutcase who's trying to wrap herself in these larger sociological issues and kind of weasel out of any further answer based on that.
I've always thought the craziest thing about her wasn't the white-black thing, but the fact that she faked all those hate crimes and that she reported to the Spokane police. Josh, you could be gender fluid in this country, but if you're racially fluid, you seem to get mocked relentlessly. Why is that?
Well, I think it's because I think that they actually are very closely tied, because both gender and race are just social constructs. I mean, Louis C.K., the comedian, I don't think any one of us would, deny the fact that he's as white and male as all of us, but he's actually Mexican and Jewish. So, I mean, those are two, minority communities. But because of the red hair and the pale skin, he passes as white, so he's basically a white guy. So the interesting thing about Rachel Dolezal is that she was able to pass for so long. And if she was able to do that, just as if you see a transgender male or female who you don't know is transgender, to them, they're just who they say they are. And for a long time, Rachel Dolezal was that. So I think she kind of, live and let live at the very least. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a woman or to be black, but, I don't have any reason to complain against that. If that's how she wants to identify, fine. Now, when people of color have complaints, well, that's a discussion she should probably have with them. But I just don't think it's up to any of us to say who anyone else is.
Well, I mean, after
There's two differences. Oh, I'm sorry. Two differences. One is that this all came out because she chose to be a public figure. And so before...
No, it came out because her parents narked her out to the media. Like, she was working in the Washington chapter of the NAACP. No one knew who she was.
No one would care if she wasn't running an NAACP chapter.
Yeah, I mean, if she just worked at CVS as a cashier, nobody would... So there's kind of... Again, I'm not stepping hard on these points, but I mean, if you push yourself into the public specter in whatever form, you are giving up certain bits and pieces of privacy. I think the second one would be that when all this started to come out, her parents narking her out and the media starting to come up with these pictures, she didn't really step up and say, look, I'm a person who was born phenotypically in one way, but I identify culturally in another way, and, I need my space on that. And I think, she tried to lie about it. She tried to hide from it. I think it seems, forgive me, Rachel, it seems like she came up with this argument about herself very far removed from the time when this was brought to the public's attention.
Eric, after...
I will admit I am shocked that we're saying her name again. I kind of thought that was done.
You're welcome. Eric, after the Caitlyn Jenner thing, everyone got scolded for making fun of her. Don't you call her this? Why hasn't there been the same response to it? Rachel Dolezal's quote transition.
I don't know. The way I look at it, I think of Oprah, saying to people, transgender for everybody, race for everybody, like just letting anybody be whatever they want. It's something similar to that. I mean, at this point, if we've already let people decide to be women or men when they're the opposite gender, then just throw race in. Next thing you know, maybe some people want to be aliens. Some people will say Pluto's a planet. It's not. You know what I mean? Like it's just an irrelevant argument. It's not worth getting into because no side is going to be right. And it's just, to me, it's just one of those things you push off to the side and stay out of.
All right. Well, with that, I would like to go and begin my
Well, I will say
transition.
this. One more point, though. One more point on this I will mention. At least just, I think that one of the reasons why we love to talk about her and why she keeps coming back is because, there is attitudes haven't shifted yet on the transgender thing, obviously, but they are shifting. People are starting to become more accepting of that. And people always need someone to shit on. And I think something about, and to be fair, I have heard arguments where that by claiming to be black, she is, in sort of insulting the struggle of people who don't get to choose or whatever. That it's like the ultimate form of white privilege to choose to be black. But I know Eric was kind of, maybe kidding there, but I absolutely think, why don't we just let people be who they say they are? If Peter
I was serious.
said that, he was a 1920s Alcatraz inmate because of the shirt he's wearing, I would accept that and hope he gets released and, don't get on the raft, Peter. No one ever makes it.
I was serious with what I said, but let me ask you one thing. When people start saying, though, that they're legitimately vampires or zombies and they want to identify as a vampire, is that okay, too?
There people already identify as vampires.
No, of course.
It already does.
Say now it becomes legally binding. Now it's something that's legal. I'm legally a vampire.
Well, the thing is that there's no...
legally black.
Yeah, well, who is?
Okay, but in the case of transgender, though, whenever a man is going into a woman's washroom, that is when it becomes a question of legality at that point. By the way, I am for this stuff. I don't mind. It doesn't bother me either way what people want to be. But I'm asking
of course.
At what point do we hold the people to a standard where, like a woman going in a man's bathroom, vice versa?
Well, I think it always comes down to the what is involved. With the bathroom thing, I've never personally understood that. But again, I've gone to the bathroom in a ditch in the desert with, all sexes, and all you want to do is sit and think about where you are. So, I don't know. I think it comes down to, if the person who's a vampire wants to start drinking blood, saying they need that to survive, all right, I think we found the line. Like, as soon as your actions actually hurt someone else or, infringe on them in a way that others don't, the bathroom argument loses credibility with me because, what happens if because I guess the implication is that if you're the opposite sex claiming to be the sex, you're going to go in the bathroom to sneak a peek or whatever. I never quite get what they're afraid of, but whatever that transgender person could do, a person of the same sex could do as well. And, there's sort of, there's a balance there. No one, humans aren't food for people already. So if vampires started trying to drink blood, I think you could say, hey, vampires, fucking quit it.
Speaking for the vampire community, No, you make a good point. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I really don't think of bathrooms as overly sexualized places.
There's still stalls in them, right?
Yeah, there's stalls and all that, but I mean,
it's only men that stand to lose the most, I would say, in that case.
But
there is an interesting one. I was just going to say there's a story going up today that I'm going to be doing about a case, I forget which state, but a transgender student, male to female, the Obama administration or the Justice Department, or maybe it was the Department of Education, one of them said that she has to be allowed to shower with the other girls. Now, showering, that is also, I get the initial thing, but here's the thing. I remember in gym class as a chubby kid growing up, I didn't want to shower with dudes either. You know, if privacy in the showers is such a big deal, require privacy for every student. If not, shut up and then don't look at their genitals. Or do. I don't know. It's a free country.
It's a free country.
That is as noble a thought we can leave it on as any. So thank you guys for joining us once again. Hopefully you tune in next week, and keep reading Latest.com.